So my name's Maddie Joseph. I'm a rising third year PhD student at Northwestern. I'm in the chemical engineering department. I'm co-advised, which means I have two PhD advisors on my thesis project. One of them is Danielle Tolman-Ersick. The Tolman-Ersick lab is a protein engineering lab. And the other advisor is Jennifer Dunn, and she does a type of sustainability modeling called life cycle assessment. And I work at the interface of those two labs. So I use life cycle assessment and related models to analyze the potential contributions to the environment and sustainability that we could make with the biotechnology we're working on in the Tolman-Ersick lab.
That's really cool.
Thank
And then
you.
what made you choose this path?
So I always knew I wanted to be an engineer. My dad is an engineer. I started telling people that I wanted to go to MIT when I was in first grade. I did not go to MIT. But yeah, I was really passionate about engineering my entire high school career. I was actually involved in a similar program to you. It was called SWEETS, the Society of Women in Engineering, Entrepreneurship, Technology, and Science. And when it came time to go to college, I went to the University of Chicago and I was a molecular engineering major there. And I had the opportunity to do undergraduate research in Alison Squire's lab at the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering. And I just fell in love with it. I was doing purely wet work back then, wet lab work, meaning I was working like in a laboratory, not doing any kind of computer modeling. And I did it for 3 years and decided I wanted it to be a major part of my life. So that's how I decided to go to grad school. And I chose Northwestern because I'm actually local to the area and I really wanted to have, the next 5 years of my life be close to home, but also because we have an amazing chemical engineering department here. And there were just a lot of boxes that the department checked for me. So not only really strong academic and research program, but also a community of people that really care about each other, that care about the local community and care about the global community.
And then were there any specific moments in your career that really inspired or motivated you?
I think meeting my PI in undergrad was a huge moment that inspired me. Allison is one of my heroes to this day. She's incredibly powerful and inspiring and smart, but also a really compassionate and empathetic person who really wanted to make everyone feel included in her lab and I think in the scientific community more broadly. So just developing that relationship with my undergraduate PI. I also think learning about life cycle assessment, which is the sustainability modeling tool that the Dunn Lab uses. I remember like my first week of grad school, Professor Dunn came in and gave a presentation to all of the new first years where she was talking about life cycle assessment. And I had never heard of it before. And I was like, wow, like, this can change the world for the better. And kind of from that moment, I was really interested in the technique and all of the surrounding research. And that was definitely a pivotal moment for me.
And then I know you mentioned like your two PhD mentors and then your PI, but were
Yes.
there any specific people or mentors that made a significant impact on you?
I think besides my advisors, so both in undergrad and PhD, all of them, I've only ever worked with women for women in science, which has been incredibly inspiring for sure. They're such great role models and examples of what empowered women look like and can do in STEM. But I also had a mentor when I was doing undergraduate research, Jiao Chong. She is an amazing scientist. She looked over my applications. She helped me do research that like I ended up being a middle author on one of her papers. We still chat every so often, just check in. And I think she was a person that made me understand what grad school could look like for me when I had actually not considered a PhD prior to doing undergrad research. So she was a major force in my life that really inspired me to go into STEM. And then, also my mom. My mom is not a scientist, not an engineer, but always encouraged me to do whatever I was interested in. And I had so many weird little obsessions growing up, and she really facilitated my curiosity. Like from the time I was a little kid, she taught me to read to me every day. Like I was obsessed with dinosaurs. Like that was my first career that I was ever interested in, was being a paleontologist when I was like 3 years old. And she was like, yeah, do it. And bought me like every book on dinosaur, checked out every library book on dinosaurs, like would literally talk to me about dinosaurs for hours. And I think that was kind of like my first, oh, I want to be a scientist. And she just facilitated all of that.
He sounds great. And then when you initially entered this field, were there any struggles that made you reconsider your career choice? And if there were any, how did you push through that?
Great question. I think one of the really daunting things about doing a PhD, which again, that's just the beginning of your career as a high level scientist, is it's really, really long. It's 5 years on average for the engineering sciences. And I think just that timeline has always been intimidating to me. It continues to be intimidating to me, even though I'm already through 2 full years. And I think one of the things that you can do to manage the stress associated with just sort of unclear long time, like I have no idea when exactly I'm going to defend. It could be in 3 years, it could be in 4 years. Like I just don't know. I think one of the ways that I get through that is being really disciplined about the day to day and the week to week and not getting lost on the month to month and the year to year as much. Just kind of having a plan at the beginning of each week about what I'm going to do each day, and then also checking in with myself about how that's actually going to contribute to my long-term goals and project milestones and things like that. So I think just being organized in small ways really translates to being organized in terms of the big picture, which I think is what people generally stress about. And then I think another thing that PhD students really struggle with, and maybe everyone just struggles with this at some point in their life, is what's called imposter syndrome. So feeling like you're the only person in the room that doesn't deserve to be there, feeling like everyone is smarter than you, feeling like everyone is more qualified than you. I don't know anyone who doesn't struggle with that. I'm really fortunate to be in an environment where people are really open about their experiences with imposter syndrome. That was something I didn't really quite experience until I was maybe my senior year of undergrad, and I was doing research and I was like, I am not a real scientist. I'm a phony. Like, how could I possibly be doing contributive research? And again, just like trying to grapple with long timelines, that's not something that really ever goes away. But one way I overcome it and I manage it is just by talking to people who have kind of tread this path before me and getting their perspective on the fact that they felt exactly the same way. And kind of a similar strategy also to the long timeline where like you just do what you can. Like if you're not feeling that good about yourself on a certain day, it's like, okay, well, I know I can run this one experiment, or like, I know I can do this one type of literature review. I'm just going to do that for now. And I've actually found that just kind of narrowing your focus on one thing that's really actionable that you can have a lot of ownership over in the moment that you're feeling really stressed out about not being good at your job is actually a really good way to prove to yourself that you are good at your job. So yeah, I think those are the two main things in my particular context that I struggle with and constantly working on overcoming.
That was really insightful. And then what goals do you have for your future career?
Yeah, so usually when people go into higher education, so like post college education, if you're getting a PhD, basically people talk about either academia or they talk about industry. Kind of a false binary. There are a lot of different career opportunities for people with PhDs, but it's definitely still the case that a lot of people who don't necessarily know about your field or about higher education in general will ask like, oh, you must want to be a professor, right? I actually don't want to be a professor, but I am not like a hardcore, oh, I have to, be doing a really traditional like chemical engineering job, like working at a food company or a pharmaceutical company. I think for me, what's really cool about the PhD is that it teaches you how to think, how to develop a project, how to work with teammates that have totally different technical backgrounds, but also like very technical backgrounds, and also working with people who don't have technical backgrounds. So just like that exposure to a diversity of different collaborators really empowers you to do kind of anything. And because sustainability is such a policy related topic, I know that I want to do something that involves like something that'll benefit the community, that will benefit the environment, but also is still technical and lets me take advantage of all the technical skills I gained during my PhD. So what I think that might look like for me is working for potentially like a government agency like the Environmental Protection Agency, or working for some kind of environmental consulting group and helping them figure out what the most viable ways forward are on some important sustainability related topics. But that's not really like academia or industry. It's kind of like a hybrid of both of those. And then also you're bringing in all kinds of other things like advocacy and policy making, and community outreach. So just basically something really integrated.
Yeah, that's really cool. Like I've never heard of that before. And then, if any, what kinds of adversaries have you faced because of your gender or background?
So I'll actually come at it from the opposite perspective initially. So one big area of privilege or advantage that I bring with me into spaces as a graduate student is that I went to a very research intensive undergrad institution. So the institution that I went to is very highly ranked. It has a lot of money, provided me a lot of opportunities to gain research skills, education, and technical education, tons of different things that not a lot of people have access to. So that put me in a really advantaged position coming into graduate school. I also went to a really well-funded public school in my area. So I have always been very technically trained. I came in as a good writer with a really strong STEM background. And I think those are advantages and privileges that a lot of people don't come in with. That said, one thing that I've definitely encountered, I think specifically because I'm a woman, is in grad school and to some extent in undergrad as well, there's a lot of expectation that you do service. That's not necessarily volunteering like you might think of in the high school context. It's basically just anything you do that's not teaching or research. And this is kind of just a statistical reality, but it's also reflected in my own experience, is women tend to do the vast majority of that labor. And again, it is completely uncompensated. You don't receive like additional money for doing a lot of these roles. So, organizing things like social events for the department or like volunteering to give tours, things like that. Women are definitely disproportionately doing that work. And I think to some extent you are expected to do it because someone is expected to do it. And the way that it shakes out is very frequently the same people kind of volunteer for the same roles. And again, mostly they're women. So I think that's something that comes up frequently. I think luckily I'm in a department that's really aware of that, and we're trying to move away from that in a very intentional fashion. But I think particularly in a lot of places that have not considered how gender disparities come into play when they're not necessarily like written in a handbook. It's not like, somebody wrote down like, oh, 60 to 80% of the service work has to be done by women. Like that's not a requirement anywhere, but it just works out that way. So again, like not everybody is looking at that with intentionality, and it's something that puts a lot of stress on women and their time, and it's not compensated. So I would say that's definitely a challenge that's not something I uniquely face at all, but definitely something that exists. But again, I think people are a lot more aware of this in 2024 than they would have been even in like 2014.
Yeah, okay. And then what do you perceive to be the largest barrier or obstacle to female leadership or just girls in engineering?
I think burnout is a huge issue, and it's not completely unrelated to what I just mentioned. So I think women tend to be very conscientious and want to be involved in the community and are very people oriented generally. And again, that's my opinion. This is what I've observed, but at least as far as I've seen, that's true. And I think sometimes what that can lead to is people overextending themselves and using up a lot of either their free time or their professional time that they maybe could be using to write more papers or to give more presentations or, any number of things that are what people are looking for on paper. And then they just get really tired. It's a lot of effort to put all that time in and then not be rewarded, and then also risk not advancing, particularly if you're in a place that doesn't do a good job of recognizing service contributions. And then I think people feel like kind of stuck or left behind. And I think that can really contribute to burnout. And actually, retention is a problem kind of regardless of gender or race. Like these are just hard positions to stay in. They're very demanding. But I think when you put additional demands on people's time and energy like that, it's much more likely that they'll burn out, and not necessarily directly from the work. I also do think my institution's pretty good about this, but particularly when you get into like later stages in your career where people are having families, like the parental care situation in the United States is just really bad. Like people are expected to return to work 12 weeks after they have a child, which is totally unique to the United States. That's not really a thing other places. So I think especially when people are trying to maintain a work-life balance and have a family, we don't have systems in place that really allow people to balance both, and it forces people to choose. And again, like this labor falls disproportionately on women. which means that a lot of times women are sort of forced to choose between having a career and having a family, which is something that's a problem at the systemic level and it needs to be changed from the top down.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then why do you think that diversity in a workplace is important, and in particular, gender diversity?
Yeah, I think this is like not an original opinion at all, but I think there are tons of evidence that shows that when people bring their different perspectives, it allows the types of questions that you ask and the types of solutions you employ to be a lot further reaching. So basically, we're able to try more things because we think of more things when we have a diversity of perspectives. Because, life experience, I've come to understand, absolutely translates into how you do your science, how you ask questions, how you go about answering them. And I think, yeah, again, like women's experience is different than men's, different than other gender identities. And those unique perspectives, but also shared experiences between women that foster a sense of inclusion and community can come together really powerfully to make sure that we're exploring all the possibilities for solving these big challenges in society, whether that's climate change or biotechnology problems like developing medicines, cure for cancer, like all that stuff, all the big headline science problems we want to solve. We need as many perspectives as possible. Women do provide a unique perspective.
Yeah, okay. And then what traits do you have that help you deal with the adversity of being a woman in these male-dominated fields? And also, how would you suggest someone else try to cultivate those traits?
So for me, I think, again, like this is my characteristics or qualities. It's not going to be universal to women by any stretch of the imagination. I think I'm very oriented toward the experience of others. So this comes back to bite me as I explain, because I do end up over volunteering sometimes. But I do really think I try to center the experience of the other, which can be, like I remember people's birthdays. I bake for our group meetings. I think people would generally characterize me as having a really positive outlook, and I think it can be contagious. And people have told me that before, just always looking on the bright side and helping people have an optimistic perspective when they're feeling, kind of in distress or left behind or any of these other common emotional experiences in grad school, I think is really healthy for the community. I'm also really organized. I'm a spreadsheeter. I'm like a serial spreadsheeter. I actually just made one right now. So, advanced planning, both short term and long term, keeping track of everything, making sure to have like notes of important meetings that you can refer back to, like just writing lots of thoughts down and organizing them so I can come back to them for a paper or a presentation or an important meeting. All of these things I think are very much skills. They're not necessarily characteristics. I think I do happen to be a little bit more organized by nature, but a lot of these skills are totally learnable and we can teach people them. And I think they're not necessarily like the core skills you need to complete a PhD well, especially because you need a lot of technical skills to do that, but it's one of those like so-called soft skills that makes your life so much easier if you can do it. I think both of these things are totally a choice. I think you can train yourself to be a positive thinker. I think one of the biggest things that people can do is just like practice saying a nice thing, whether it's about yourself or about a teammate, like acknowledging people, honoring people when they're doing something well, including when you do something well. Like if you had a really good day of work and you got a lot done, you should, take a moment to be like, wow, I had a really good day of work and I got a lot of stuff done. I think this might be evidence that I'm actually a good scientist. I did that yesterday. Or, just like taking a minute to tell your teammate, hey, like, I know you've been struggling with this technique and you've been putting a lot of hours in to get better at it. And like that result, that looks amazing. Or like, hey, like, I know you're kind of new to service work, but you're doing a great job planning this event. And like, I really appreciate the work you put in. I think things like that, that's not even a skill. Like, that's just kind of an intentional practice where if you start doing it, you'll find that you do it more and it creates an amazing, inclusive, welcoming environment and anyone can do it. And then the organizational stuff, again, it's like just start doing little things. Like, if you find yourself like really pressed for time all the time and you feel like you never have enough time to get in what you thought you were going to do, take a step back, And like if you're going hour by hour, day by day, maybe just sit down and do like a week. Think about like what you'd realistically like to accomplish in a week. And then at the end of the week, check back in with yourself to see like, did I actually finish these things? And if you finish all of them in the first 2 days, you're underestimating your ability to get stuff done. And if you didn't get any of it done, you're way overestimating your ability to get it done. So I think just kind of again checking in with yourself about these things, but like having, something that you write down and you can reference back to, you give yourself evidence for what works and what doesn't work. And I think that again, like that's just a skill, that's just a practice that you can build up over time.
So like to keep a positive attitude, you really just have to encourage yourself and others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, like I feel like a lot of times people are hand wavy, just like just be positive. Like I don't know what that necessarily means. Like I know what it means for the people I think of as positive. Like I can identify habits that they do, but I think especially when people are like in a rut and somebody's like, "Well, just be positive." Like that's super not constructive and did not honor their experience. But taking it like one compliment or like one positive feedback instance at a time, I think allows you to actually build up a meaningful sense of positivity and support in the workplace and in the research environment.
Yeah, okay. And then just for our final question, what advice would you give to other women who want to enter your career field?
There's a lot of pressure to do things the right way. And particularly when you get into higher education, if you're in a PhD, there are like some wrong things to do, like giving yourself a really hard time or being unconstructive with other people, like not taking advice. Like there are a couple like wrong ways to do it, but there's really not a right way to do it. And I think not comparing yourself harshly against your peers is really important. I also think that's really important for women in male dominated fields because sometimes there's inadvertently a pressure to compete with other women. And that's not what we want to do. We want to be collaborators and colleagues. We don't want to be competitors. And I think the fastest way to make someone into your competition is to start comparing yourself against them. So instead of comparing yourself, maybe observing or even better, having a conversation with that person about, what are their strategies for success and then trying to apply those to your own life, not just sort of abstracting like, oh, this person is better than me in 1, 2, 3, 4 ways, and I'm not doing enough. I'll never be at their level. Like there's generalizable and actionable things you can take away from anybody's experience, which is why I think it's really important to have conversations like this without like having to compare yourself in a kind of like an emotionally destructive way.
So that's all the questions that I have for today, and thank you so much for meeting with me.
Yeah, of course.